youth hockey and travel hockey, it's Minnesota, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan. Those are really, and upstate.
Yeah.
Those are, that's where you get your hockey players. But
what about Vegas versus Los Angeles? I am loving this series. I'm loving the fact that the Golden Knights...
It's a good series.
I'm loving the fact that the Golden Knights haven't lost a single game. I'm on the bandwagon. They're my team this year.
I do have to ask you something, Eleanor. How come you weren't giving Vegas credit? You said that they were going to get knocked out in the first round. What was it more so experience?
I just thought it wasn't... I just thought that the Kings were the better team. It's not that I don't like Vegas, or I think that they're great and they're fun to watch. And they do have veterans. It's an expansion team. They have James Neal. They have Fleury. They have David Perron. They have these players.
I missed Perron.
He was a Penguin for like a couple weeks.
I know.
Yeah, for like 2 seconds.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people wrote Vegas off just because they were an expansion team, but a lot of people are upset and they think that the NHL handed them this team. And the expansion draft is different than it was 10 years ago. Like, you're getting different players, and I think a lot of people don't understand that.
I mean, Bettman changed the rules to make the Golden Knights more competitive.
Right, and I think I want a more competitive team. I don't want...
But it's also, you got to give the opposing GMs, the criticism that they deserve. I mean, the Panthers GM let Marchessault go to get rid of Riley Smith. William Karlsson was let go for nothing. I mean, you got to give
even James Neal, too.
Yeah, James Neal was let go. Fleury was let go. I mean, it's not necessarily that Bettman's fixing the games as much as it is. The other GMs were just stupid.
And all these players...
And George McPhee.
Yeah, well, I'll give McPhee credit, too. He set his team up incredibly well for the future
Gerard
and in the present.
He's a great coach. The
Jack
biggest
Adams winner.
Mistake the Panthers ever made.
Yep.
But anyway, with this series, again, it's a lot closer than people think. Every goal has been a one-goal game. And it's a battle of the goaltenders. Marc-Andre Fleury has been incredible, and Jonathan Quick has been incredible.
Yep.
The Kings break down in every single game. Every game.
Yeah, Quick has kept him in the game.
Yeah, and the Kings, you need more. You need more depth. And the Kings defensemen were 5th in the NHL this season for points, and they have 3 points in this series.
That's scary.
Need more from Drew Doughty.
100%.
100%.
What about a series that I've had trouble getting into, mainly because it's on so late? Ducks-Sharks.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of this series either. It's very tough for me to get into also.
I mean, the Sharks are playing better than the Ducks from the little bit I've seen.
Didn't they just blow out the Ducks, too? Like 8-1?
They're up 3-0 in the series. It's just a laugher of a series. It's a joke. I haven't missed much in terms of when I've went to sleep.
It's lopsided.
Yeah, it is.
It is. The Sharks are the better team. The Ducks aren't a great playoff team.
John Gibson's disappointing me. I will say that.
And I think John Gibson is very underrated.
Not in this series.
But not in this series. Not in the playoffs. But in the regular season, I do think that he's an underrated goalie.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Regular season, he's a good goalie.
But he hasn't been making a very good case for himself this
He's a
series.
reverse Matt Murray. Pretty much, yeah.
Same with Braden Holtby.
Exactly, yeah.
But I feel bad because he's not getting the help. He's not getting the goals scored. You can't win if you can't score. And he's not getting the help on defense. And the Sharks are better. The Sharks are so deep. Their third line with Melker Karlsson is amazing. So you're getting all 4 lines scoring, and the power play is scoring. I mean, what else are the Ducks going to do?
Absolutely.
Honestly.
So, on that note, let's take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, because we'll have an exclusive interview with Tony Castro coming up next. He's the author of Gehrig and the Babe, The Friendship and the Feud. It's coming up next on Beyond the Game on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3. WHPC.
Hi, I'm Janelle Hale, founder and CEO of the National Breast Cancer Foundation. Early detection saved my life. It could save yours too. I was only 34 years old and the mother of 3 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was forced to make a decision about my health with few options. After my treatment, I made a commitment to provide help and inspire hope to those affected by breast cancer through early detection, education, and support services. I was fortunate to have resources and support through my journey, but so many facing breast cancer have to overcome the burdens of cost and fear alone. No one should face breast cancer alone. Today, NBCF has provided over 1 million early detection and patient navigation services so that women in need have access to these potentially life-saving resources. To learn what every woman needs to know about breast cancer, visit nbcf.org.
Alexa, can you please do my food shopping today?
Food shopping today added to your shopping list.
Alexa, can you do my math homework for me?
I'm not sure.
Alexa, play WHPC.
Play WHPC.
You can now listen to the voice of Nassau Community College on your Amazon Echo.
Simply say, Alexa, play WHPC.
I am already playing WHPC.
Sorry. So go ahead and buy a silicone steamer in the shape of a faceless melting pig.
Buy a silicone steamer in the shape of a faceless melting pig.
Yeah, that exists. And while you shop, play WHPC.
Or buy a headband with a mullet hair attached to it.
I refuse to buy a headband with mullet hair attached to it.
Yeah, that exists too. Not sure why. But when you buy it, you can play WHPC.
So play WHPC on your Amazon device today.
And thanks for listening to 90.3 WHPC.
You are listening to Beyond the Game on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I am Jacob Volk. Sitting across from me, Eric Fischetti and Joe Ardita. And we are fortunate enough to be joined by Tony Castro, the author of Gehrig and the Babe, The Friendship and the Feud. Tony, how are you?
I'm well, Jacob. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for taking the time. So, can you take us through the first day that Gehrig and Ruth met?
They met in the summer, or late spring, early summer of 1923, and Babe Ruth was taking extra batting practice, if you can imagine. It's 1923. It's the first day. It's the first year of Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium. And it has been a traumatic experience the first few weeks of the season because that Yankee Stadium dwarfed the previous stadium the Yankees played in, the Polo Grounds. The Polo Grounds left field and right field fences were just a little longer than today's Little League fences, really. And a lot of the home runs that Babe and others might have hit down the line were no longer going for that. They were going to, they were becoming fly balls. And so it was one of those days where even though the Yankees were doing well and Babe was doing well hitting-wise, batting average, driving in runs, the power numbers weren't there, so he was taking batting practice. So you can imagine what that meant. Everybody else was taking an extra batting practice that day. And as they're doing this, here comes onto the field manager Miller Huggins, along with this hulking guy right behind him. It was Lou Gehrig. And Miller wants Gehrig to take some batting practice cuts. So it was like a scene out of The Natural, maybe, the motion picture with Robert Redford, in that Gehrig comes up, he doesn't have his bat, he doesn't have Wonder Boy. He winds up using somebody else's Wonder Boy. He uses a bat that he doesn't realize is Babe Ruth's bat. And everybody's looking at Ruth because Ruth is very particular about his bats being touched. Anyway, Gehrig gets the bat, goes up there, and this is an unusually heavy bat. It was a 42-ounce bat, which I know today players use very light bats because of the whipping action and the whole new philosophy on hitting. But at that time, bats were heavier, but Babe's was the heaviest. So Lou takes a couple of cuts. Balls don't really go anywhere, but then with the following cuts, it becomes like that scene out of The Natural where ball after ball is going to land in the right field bleachers. And so here's the introduction. They had met earlier. Gehrig had been introduced to Ruth as Ruth was getting ready in the locker room, and Gehrig's response had been "Hiya, kid," which is "Hiya, kid," which is the same way Gehrig greeted everyone. He had a difficult time remembering names, and it was always "Hiya, kid." I mean, I've talked to people who spoke with him a great deal in the 40s when he was still alive, but even then it was "Hiya, kid," and it was "Hiya, kid," no matter how long he knew you. So it was this kind of relationship, and early on they got along great for several years, in fact, because in 23, after that impressive showing in batting practice, they still sent him to the minors, and it's not until 1925 when Lou comes back up, and he is a bench player until that day when Lou takes over first base.
For Wally Pipp.
He had actually, the streak that was associated with Gehrig actually began the day before when he pinch hit, and he was in that game. And then, of course, the next day, the streak begins as he takes over for Wally Pipp, who had, the story is, he had complained of a headache, although it's questionable as to what the source of that headache was. Was it really being beamed in the previous day's game, or had he been beamed earlier and was still suffering from pray tell concussions, which weren't heard of? They were unheard of at that period. I mean, if you got beamed, you got up and you continued playing. There was no such thing as a concussion protocol. So he takes over first base, and Wally Pipp eventually winds up going to another ball club.
All right, now, how did the feud between Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig actually start?
Started very slowly. Started in the early 1930, 1931. Babe Ruth was never satisfied with how much money he was making. I mean, at one point he was making more money than the President of the United States, Herbert Hoover. And somebody asked him about this and said, why are you making more money than the President of the United States? And Ruth's famous response was, I had a better year. And he thought he could negotiate even better, especially after Gehrig had become Lou Gehrig. But Gehrig had had some very good seasons, 27, the year of Murderers Row, 28, another World Series championship. 29 had not been very good, but in terms of they didn't win the World Series. They're so much for Murderers Row. What happened was they were going to get together and hold out, kind of like in the 60s where you had two Dodger pitchers, Koufax and Drysdale, holding out, although they didn't hold out very successfully. And neither did Ruth and Gehrig, because what happened was that Gehrig signed right away. And at that time, the contracts were not like they are today. There was no such thing as free agency to move on. The teams had their property.
Reserve clause.
Yes. With a reserve clause, and usually players signed for whatever they got in the mail. They'd get a contract in the mail, and they were expected to send it back. So Ruth feels betrayed, but this still isn't the real thing that gets between the two players. Babe Ruth had been married early on to a very young girl, and he stayed married with her through the 20s. He'd married her when he was with the Boston Red Sox. Stayed married with her throughout most of the 20s. Even though he had met the woman that he would become Mrs. Babe Ruth in later years, Claire. He had met her in the mid-20s. Ruth wouldn't get a divorce, though, because of religious purposes, religious reasons. This womanizer, this drinker, this carouser was also a Roman Catholic, and he felt he couldn't divorce his first wife because he was a devout Catholic. Go figure.
Yeah, right?
Yes. In 1921, he and his first wife, Helen, who was still living in Massachusetts, adopted a little girl. And the story originally was that this was just a little girl that they adopted. And so this little girl by the name of Dorothy grows up with her mom, and then later she's in private school. And Ruth, meanwhile, is living large in New York. In 1929, Helen dies in a tragic fire there in Massachusetts. And this opens up the way for the second Mrs. Babe Ruth, Claire, who very quickly, just a matter of weeks after the death of the first Mrs. Babe Ruth, becomes the second and the Mrs. Babe Ruth. And she brings a child of her own into this marriage. Her name's Julia. She was a few years older than Dorothy. And they have a happy household there for a while. And it remains happy for all intents and purposes, but the difference is that it's very noticeable to some people that Claire's own child is better dressed when they go out in public than the adopted daughter, Dorothy. Dorothy herself is largely responsible for this. She was a tomboy, and she didn't go in for frilly dresses and things of the sort. She was more into sort of a tomboyish aspect at that time. Maybe overalls she wore a lot. Christina Gehrig, enter Christina Gehrig, who's a story all of her own, took to this child. Christina had lost all her children except for Lou, and she looked upon this child as her surrogate daughter. The child would stay with the Gehrigs on weekends and sometimes in the middle of the week. So she took a shine to her, and she felt that this child was being mistreated, at least in the way she was being presented to the public, that she didn't dress as nicely as the other daughter. And she voiced her concern about this because Mrs. Christina Gehrig was an unusual woman. She went to spring training with the Yankees. I mean, how many moms can you say do that on a regular basis, and not just to watch